A source in the presidency added that the Osinbajo panel will soon be submitting a sustainability plan, which the president has requested and will be expected to take the country's economy to new heights between now and 2023. President Muhammadu Buhari has asked the Vice President to chair the Economic Sustainability Committee, and the committee has been collaborating with domestic sectors of the Nigerian economy, and now the Vice President is interfacing with international agencies for the purpose of rolling out options as the President has directed. The Economic Sustainability Committee is a 7-member team chaired by Professor Yemi Osinbajo, and the committee is expected to conclude its report very soon. It was set up as a response to the recent challenges in the economic front resulting from the fall in oil prices, as well as the disruptive impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that has disrupted the global economy. Also, barring any last-minute change in plans, the disbursement of the first tranche of the Central Bank of Nigeria 50 billion naira targeted credit facility will begin on Thursday. The fund, which is being managed by the Nisal Microfinance Bank, has received over 80,000 applications. The Managing Director of Nisal Microfinance Bank, Mr. Abubakar Kure, confirmed the developments in interaction with correspondents. Kure, who did not provide the account to be disbursed in the first tranche, said that those whose applications were successful will start receiving their fund on Thursday. According to him, we are hopeful that towards Thursday or Friday, the disbursement of the fund will commence. The CBN had introduced the 50 billion naira targeted credit facility as a stimulus package to support households and micro, small, and medium enterprises affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue our conversation on the Economy and Politics show as we go on looking at the economics discourse, and today we're looking at COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on the Nigerian business environment and the manufacturing sector. Leading this discussion with me today is now Dr. Muda Yusuf. He recently bagged a PhD from the Swiss Business School. So Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Nice to have you, sir. And good morning.
Thank you very much, and good morning.
Good morning to you. And with me is my special co-guest anchor, I call him Egbon, Mr. Bosun Omofaye, CEO of Frontier Africa Reports.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Thank
sir.
you also.
Yes.
And good morning, Mr. Muda Yusuf, and congratulations.
Great to see you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
So, to begin with, Dr. Muda Yusuf, how's the lockdown been? This is lockdown phase 2, day 9. How's the experience been?
Well, it has been a very difficult one, as everybody can attest to. Businesses and complete lockdown, just as the citizens. Nothing is happening in the business space, practically. Even sectors that were exempted are also not even finding it easy. They can't move around, they can't do banking transactions, their workers cannot show up in the office and so on. So even for those that were exempted, it's still a very big issue. So practically everywhere has been shut down, and it has been very tough. Across practically all sectors, except perhaps maybe the rural areas where people can still go to farms and all of that. But as for the heart of the economy itself, nothing much is happening. What we have seen has been the social fallout or the social consequences of the lockdown. You know, a lot of people complaining about hunger, almost degenerating into security problem. People are now feeling insecure and all of this. And the tension in the social is increasing by the day. And this is because of the nature, particularly of Lagos. Lagos is driven by business, by commerce, by the informal sector people, by people who are constantly on the move. You know, so to shut down such a city for this long, you can imagine the consequences. So we are dealing with a lot of social problems. The security agencies have managed to suppress it to some extent, but quite frankly, quite a number of residents are not feeling comfortable at this time.
Okay, Doctor. So let's go on to the conversation. Your Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry is one of the robust and very renowned trade group in the country. We also know that you play a policy advocacy role. And recently, you've advocated for issues like tax breaks and concession for investors in this time. And also, you've even looked at the deregulation plans, the proposals from the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. If you could just expatiate a bit on some of these advocacy plans you've put out this period of the pandemic.
Well, if you're looking at the impact of the pandemic on business, we can categorize those issues into three. First is the impact of the lockdown, which we have discussed briefly. Practically nothing is happening, except, of course, for those who are either in the rural area or those who are in the business of data, telecoms, because a lot of course are going on the use of data and so on. So the economy is practically at a standstill. So costs are running in some places, no revenue is coming in. Then there is a macroeconomic effect, which is the most profound of all of these challenges. And that is the impact of this condition on the macroeconomic environment. That's looking at the critical indicators, such as our reserves and our exchange rate. Then, of course, there is the fact that there's a major contraction already, although we haven't seen the numbers, but you can see that the economy is already contracting. People have talked about recession, they have talked about depression and all of that. Then, of course, there is the supply chain disruption aspect of it. Quite a number of companies rely on imported raw materials and so on. Even before the lockdown, we're already experiencing challenges with the supply chains. Raw materials are not coming in. A lot of some critical inputs are not coming in. So that has been affecting production. But the biggest challenge that I see after the lockdown is the macroeconomic challenge. That is how we are going to, be able to manage the shocks that is coming, especially from the drop in crude oil price, the effect on our reserves, effect particularly on exchange rate depreciation, and the impact on businesses that have import exposure. That is the biggest challenge that I see ahead of us. So as we progress, we see how this plays out and how businesses will begin to adjust. Because what I do know is that even in manufacturing, the import dependence level is extremely high. Most of our manufacturing sector depends a lot on foreign raw materials, imported raw materials. So apart from the challenge of availability, we are facing now the challenge of cost. And you can imagine what happens in an economy where your cost is going up and where the demand is getting weaker because of the general contraction in the economy. And this is going to play out in practically all sectors of the economy, particularly to the extent that businesses have import exposure. It's also going to affect projects. Projects in the public sector, projects in the private sector. Again, if you have projects that require foreign exchange and all of that, that is a challenge. Then, of course, we are likely to see a major issue around foreign exchange management. It is not clear yet how the central bank intends to manage the situation. There is the model of rationing, which we have done in the past, and we know the kind of crisis that created. There is the challenge of the multiplicity of rates. There is the challenge of the premium between the official window and other windows. And we know the kind of distortions that came with all of these things. Then there is the challenge of forex liquidity. Already I'm beginning to get feelers that there's a liquidity challenge in the foreign exchange markets. So all of these things become more manifest when the lockdown is over and businesses resume. So the picture will now begin to become much clearer. Then, of course, there's the revenue effect. Government revenue is going to be badly affected with this. First, from the point of view of the crash in oil price. And I'm saying that it's better for government to work an economic management model of zero revenue from oil. Let's take it from that extreme. Let's construct a model of how we want to manage the economy with that kind of situation. Then we can now move on from there. Because from what we are seeing in the oil market, from the kind of prices we are seeing, and from the point of view also of the cost of production of oil in Nigeria, it's better not to expect that anything tangible will come from the oil sector. So these are the critical issues that are bothering the business community at this time. And how the policymakers respond to it will determine the extent of the impact that it will have on the business environment.
Now, Dr. Muda Yusuf, businesses drive the economy in terms of private sector and even the micro, small, and medium enterprises. This period shows a challenge because there's going to be cutting down of expenses. We're going to see challenges of jobs, poor revenues, and even bankruptcies, as we are seeing across the world. Bailouts, in terms of bailouts, may not really come from governments, though we read in the highlights, the central bank, to NISA, is providing 50 billion naira intervention, which over 80,000 applications have already come through. I've seen one of your proposals from the LCCI. You're talking about unconditional waiver of penalties and interest for all outstanding tax payments to companies. What are the other issues that will really come up for MSMEs who are key drivers of the economy and major employers of labor in the country?
Well, the government, at least through the central bank, from the monetary policy angle or from the monetary authorities angle, there has been some significant intervention in terms of palliatives. The CBN, as you know, has given moratorium on the CBN intervention funds. For a year, there has been a reduction in interest, again for 1 year, on those funds. One of the complaints I've got is the fact that the commercial banks are yet to come on board in terms of these palliatives. We have had engagement at very senior levels in the central bank on this, and we are being told that there's already an ongoing engagement with the bankers committee to agree on what kind of concession that the banks should give. Because the truth of the matter is that nothing is happening, particularly in this lockdown. So if people are taking a loan or taking credit and still expecting them to be repaying and to be paying interest for a fund that is not being utilized, then we are not being fair again to those who are the investors. And only recently I saw indication that some banks are already giving moratorium on credit to small businesses. So in that area or in that space, what we expect to see a lot more is more clarity from the commercial banks. Not necessarily on a case-by-case basis, because what I've seen is that individual customers go, you negotiate, and all of that. Not all customers have the capacity to enter into individual negotiation. The big ones may be, but when we talk of SMEs, we cannot have that. So we like to see a systemic, across-the-board concession from the commercial banks to the SMEs, saying that we are giving this interest rate concession, we are giving this moratorium across board, not necessarily on a bank-to-bank basis or on a customer-specific basis. I've engaged some bankers. They have also explained their constraints in this respect. They talk about the high CRR that they are committed to, which is 27.5%, which is affecting their own liquidity as well. talked about the fact that they have to pay NDIC 1% or 1.5%, that they have to pay AMCON, and they also have to pay salaries. They have their own working capital overhead to deal with. So that has constrained, according to them, their own ability to give any such concessions. So that is why we are also calling on the Central Bank of Nigeria to relax the space for the commercial banks, particularly from the angle of the CRR, that the commercial banks can have more room to be able to give concessions to businesses that have borrowed from them. Because it's also in the interest of everybody. Because with the scenario that is unfolding, you are likely to see even a higher level of non-performing loans if businesses are not given this opportunity to have a breather for them to be able to come back alive from this COVID-19 pandemic. Then, of course, there are issues with fiscal policy space. I've mentioned the issue of the tax. Only recently I had some announcement from FRD giving some concessions on the filing of returns, late filing, reverse of penalty, and all of that. That is a welcome development. I think we need to see more of that. We have thought that one of our recommendations is that you see a relaxation of income tax, company income tax, a complete waiver for any business that is in the medical space. Because what this COVID-19 pandemic has revealed is our weakness in the health sector, Apparently, the government doesn't have the capacity. So if you have complementary investments from the private sector, we should be as liberal as we can be around issues of taxation for hospitals and hospital companies. There is no point asking hospitals to be paying company income tax. The kind of services they are rendering, it's not as if it's that profitable. The margins are very thin. The overhead is high. They spend a lot on energy and all of that. So if you have a waiver, at least for 1 year, for any investment in the medical or the health sector space, that would be a great thing to do. And I can assure you that that will not have the material impact revenue. Then there's a lot that we can also do in the area of import tariffs. Our tariff levels are too high. And it's part of the reasons we have a high-cost environment. It's part of the reasons we have an industrial sector that is not competitive. I'm not talking now about tariffs on finished goods that you can produce. But even for goods, raw materials, inputs, the tariffs are too high. And the challenges that businesses face through the importation processes, the documentation, the custom clearance, the cargo delivery processes, those challenges are quite enormous. There are infrastructural challenges in that case. There are also, process issues. There are also even some transparency problems in the whole press. We need to clean up all of this. Because at a time like this, we need the investment environment to be more efficient, to be able to live up to the expectation challenges of the moment. Because we need to create jobs. We need to provide employment. We need to also generate revenue. If government is now looking in the way of non-oil revenue, if the businesses are not healthy, where will the non-oil revenue come from? So you have a situation where there's a collapse of oil revenue, and if you don't manage the investment environment well, non-oil revenue also collapse. Then how are you going to sustain the system? So, and I've said it, it's important that there is regular engagement between the policymakers, the regulators, and the stakeholders in the economy, so that we can identify the pain points and see what kind of intervention is most appropriate, without necessarily hurting either government revenue and all of that. And of course, the regulatory agencies, they also need to be more friendly to investment. And more importantly in all of this, we need to relax our foreign exchange management space. We need a lot of private capital to come in, because oil revenue is not coming in. So we should be looking at how we can get more diaspora remittances, how we can get FDI, because we know the failure that portfolio investment can bring to an economy. And that is why we have always said it is not a good to rely too heavily on portfolio flows. And now we are going to pay a price for that. Most of these portfolio flows have been passed. Many of them are on the verge of getting out, which is putting additional pressure on our reserves. So if we relax the environment very well, the economy is a big economy. There are a huge area of opportunities, of which even those of us within the economy are not seeing. So there are still people who want to bring in funds in this economy. But if we don't liberalize our foreign exchange space, those funds may not come in as easily as we expect. And this situation, again, I must say, also has a silver lining. It's going to throw up a lot of opportunities, particularly in the area of import substitution. A lot of people that are importing things, whether in the service sector, in the manufacturing space, will be looking for how to substitute for imports, because imports are going to become very expensive. So that is going to open up a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs within the economy. It's also going to expand opportunities in the area of non-oil exports, because a weak currency is one of the best boosts you can give to our export sector. So again, we need to liberalize that in terms of export proceeds, so that we don't have any stranglehold on those who export in terms of how they can get their export proceeds. We have had that problem in the past, where people have to be, putting their transactions under the table. They are not filling the NXP forms to clear their proceeds because of the fact that there was an artificial exchange rate imposed on them. So we need to liberalize all these bits. And given the size of the economy, I think we can still stimulate some level of influence so that this economy can begin to get its bearing. So a lot has to come into all this from all the various perspectives of policy, the fiscal policy, the tax policy, the monetary policy, the forex policy, the institutional issues, the court process. These are the kind of things we like to see, to enable businesses to be able to, recover or ban and contribute to the recovery process in this economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf. You've spoken extensively. You've talked about the need to relax the pressure on the banks in terms of cash reserve ratio from the CBN. You've talked about the need for fiscal incentives, particularly you've really mentioned the need to liberalize the foreign exchange management space to attract capital inflows. Mr. Bolson, do you have some inputs or do you have additional question from Dr. Muda Yusuf? What are your thoughts on what he said?
I think he has spoken extensively and laid it out. And the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, LCCI, had always been at the forefront of advocating best fiscal policies, best monetary policies for industries. Again, this is the largest Chamber of Commerce in Nigeria, with the highest number of participants and members.
Trade groups and associations.
So there's a robust thinking process and the best of minds and heads and experiences and insight into the business community in Nigeria. So you're not surprised that from time to time, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce comes up with very robust and well-articulated position on what should be the government. Again, from what I know from some inside sources, the Lagos Chamber of LCCI is also part of the stakeholders that the government is interacting with at this point in time. I want to underscore some of the things that he has said, that some of these issues are peculiar to Nigeria, but again, broadly speaking, across Africa, we have basically almost the same. There's some similar problems. First, to just get everyone out there, the World Bank is reporting I think there's a new report coming out that diaspora remittances for 2020 will go down close to 20%. That will be less than $500 billion. So for low and middle income countries like Nigeria, we're going to see a very sharp pain in the arm when it comes to our diaspora remittances, and everyone knows what's going on in Italy, Spain, and the UK and all of that. So the room for us to expect 2020
billion or
$30 billion
$25
in remittances for
affected
2020,
now.
2021 will be a miracle for that to happen. So let's take that out of the way. Now, as far as the CRR is concerned, which Mr. Yusuf spoke about, in January was when the central bank monetary policy moved the cash reserve ratio
that direction.
to 27.5, I think from 22.5 or so.
22.5.
Now, that was a bit of a tightening there because at that point in time, and I remember the monetary policy comments of
Pushing
the
them to
government
support the
that,
sector.
yes, that they don't want to leave so much cash with the banks to allow them play games, as it were, in terms of the market. They don't want too much liquidity for them to push what you call the bidding rates at the open market operation. So it was a bit of a tightening there, looking at the level of liquidity, try to rein in inflation and so much money with less productive activities within the economy. So to that extent, I'm sure the central bank had played the wait-and-see attitude, and that was how it was reported both the January and March monetary MPC meetings. So I think the meeting now for May 25 and 26, which is next month, and we hope the whole lockdown would have been over by then across the country, or at least in major parts of the country, like Lagos and other industrial areas. We'll be able to see a bigger picture and see whether the MPC would have looked at the full-blown coronavirus impact globally and where markets are going, where economies are going, in particular the developed economies that have major trade relations with Nigeria, like the UK and others in Europe and in China in particular. Some of the key economic numbers for China are out. Yeah. You have the unemployment numbers in the US. Yeah. You have data, unemployment, GDP impact from the UK. Yeah. So I'm sure the monetary policy and the folks at the central bank are putting all of this together and looking at the various responses that they are also putting in, as well as the federal government. I'm sure they will have a lot of work on their hands and try to reach a decision by May 25 and May 26. Now, in terms of the problems that the banks face, in terms of the ability to lend and the structural problems that we have. Now, it's going to be, this is the toughest time for the government and the central bank, and we almost appreciate that here. It's going to be, we're still dealing with the legacy problems here. And part of it was what Mr. Yusuf talked about paying for paying AMCON fees and what have you. These were trillions of naira leftovers from the banking sector intervention. Now, what we're doing here, in the manner of speaking, is that we're going to be bailing out the small and medium enterprises, bail out of the MSMEs, basically speaking, bail out individuals on the fiscal side, in terms of those who will get palliatives from the government. Government is also giving some moratorium as it were on those who are benefiting from some of the SIP, social investment programs. At the end of the day, who will bail out the banks themselves? Because the banks are the ones that oil the engine of the economy. And the only way the banks make money, principally in Nigeria, is from the government. And a little bit from the business sector. So it's a very tight rope right now, and I wish I have a very clear-cut answer as to how we get out of this. We're bailing out the economy as a whole. But I think very quickly, maybe we go the route of South Africa has made the first stimulus intervention announcement overnight. Yes. Yeah, President Ramaphosa did a second one, and I just saw that the South African Stock Exchange, the GSC group, applauded those announcements made yesterday evening, I think about 7:30 p.m. Joburg time by their president. So which means that the financial markets in South Africa believed in what President Ramaphosa has put on, and his cabinet has put on table. Now, I look at the GSC also this morning. I look at the opening numbers about 9 o'clock their time. It's about 11 o'clock now in South Africa. The market, the GSC also opened in the green territory, which means that the market is responding positively. Yes. Then the South African inflation for the month of March also came in this morning, and that was reading a little bit. Headline inflation is lower than the month of February. 4.6% print in February, 4.1% year-on-year print in March. So there's a little room here because the fear earlier on was that the rand against the dollar will go to about 19. Now, that is receding now through some analysts are monitoring that. That's coming to about 18 to the dollar. So they're trying to put all the
measures,
all the irons in the fire
everything.
and see, just throw all the darts. But again, as we throw the darts, we must be conscious of how we do it. So that's how I agree with him. Now, to come to one key area, Dr. Yusuf, is the area around manufacturing.
Just to call you as you want
yes.
to continue, the LCCI has proposed that for 1 year there should be a waiver on tax for the manufacturing sector.
Yes.
So they don't want the manufacturing sector to be burdened by the issues of tax and all that. So they can really ramp up activities and see how they can unlock their sector. You can go on.
It's tough for the government to make that call. But I like some of the suggestions by Dr. Muda Yusuf's LCCI, which is you can reduce some of the waivers or just take them off the floor completely for a couple of months to allow them bring in certain machinery. And I think he's speaking to some of what the central bank said in their last policy response statement in the 27-page document, that they will support manufacturers and those who are in industries in terms of those who want to bring in machinery. How the central bank and the government at the center will bring in the customs into this conversation is another thing. Because I know, and Dr. Yusuf, you know some more than I do, that sometimes when policies like this are done, it gets to implementation stage, and the guys, our friends at the customs say, sorry, what we are chasing is revenue. We want to make our revenue. We have a revenue target, so don't come here and tell us that. Then we run into a brick wall. So how we're going to get all MDAs on the same page here
on any fiscal
on these fiscal responses and including the monetary policy, it remains to be seen. I haven't heard from the customs if they are in agreement, or they will be in agreement if there will be such. So we need an alignment with these so they're all from the same page. If that doesn't happen, then we're creating a big problem down the line. So the central government will definitely want to roll out incentives. And the heart of that 23-page document spoke to industrial manufacturing. And that is actually the heart of the Africa reports of yesterday released from France, Paris, the Africa Reports magazine, which was titled, "A Return to Business as Usual Will Not Benefit Africa in the Long Run." The first point here was how Africa will return to industrialization via manufacturing and not just agriculture. Because we've done much around the services sector over the number of years. But now, industrialized manufacturing
has been delayed for a long time.
Is a key issue. And to just see, each time we try to get our hands on this and become the next factory of the world, something happens and we seem to, we're going to pull back. And I just brought these two books from my library. This is the Fastest Billion. Published by Renaissance Capital through the Charles Robertson, the global chief economist. And this was at the cusp of 2012, looking back at how we arrived at the year 2010 from the year 2000, and says, look, Africa is the next billion, the story behind Africa's economic revolution. That's what this book was all about. Now, guess what? Now, about 8 years after, I think last 2017, the next factory of the world, this book was published by a Chinese author, How Chinese Investment is Reshaping Africa. Now, I got this book, and I said thank you to Mr. Femi Awuyemi, who's the chairman of the ProShare, yes, who gave this. This is the best.
That's a this
is the best gift I got for December, in fact, for the entire 2019. And reading through these two books, I found out these two books that look, Africa can be the next factory of the world, but how do we get that up and running? To move from just supplying raw materials to the rest of the world and
value addition to
on the local front. So I think a little bit our authorities are beginning to think in that direction, at least from the monetary policy side. So encouraging cotton production for textiles, encouraging rice production, encouraging palm oil and what have you, and begin to see how we move back a bit from services to industrial manufacturing, because most of the work jobs we create right now are low base, low productivity, we're paying people peanut, what you call cheap labor. environment. We know that phrase. Yes. It's a cheap labor. Now, low productivity and all of that. That will not, and that is the biggest of our productive base. So our productivity level is low. But you have very few big industries, the Dangote, the flour mills, the Olam, and others. Yes, and they're very in the minority. So the size of companies or industries or manufacturing that can create the real jobs and create the revenue base for the government and create wealth is very minimal. But on the other side, you have a massive informal economy in which folks are paid 15,000 naira per month, 10,000 naira per month, 30,000 naira per month. By the time he goes to transportation in Lagos or in Ogun State, he's left with about 200 naira, 2,000 naira at the end of the month. How do you feed and have a meaningful life based on that and pay tax that is very critical to the government? So it's a very tight rope on how we stimulate the economy and turn it around to the side of the Chamber of Commerce and their members who are in real industrial manufacturing, rather than services that we spend the last 10, 20 years or so building, on which we can, is really, really unsustainable. And that is the soundbites that I'm getting. McKinsey just sent that report, which was published through Africa Report, and it was eloquent about why Africa needs to reindustrialize. We have deindustrialized from the 1980s up to this point. Now we have to reindustrialize. And I think that's the kernel of what Mr. Muda Yusuf is speaking about, speaking to.
So Mr. Muda, just to give us your brief insight into manufacturing at this point and even your proposals and what you expect to see happen more in that space.
Well, Wilson was on point on all those issues. Industrialization is very key, in turning around the economy. But what we have not done sufficiently over the years is that we have not developed our infrastructure. That is why all the money through at agriculture, at industries, that is why we have not been getting much result. Because the beauty of industrialization is for you to be competitive all over the world. That is key. And if you are talking about industrialization, you'll not just be talking about your own market alone. You'll be talking about global market at whatever level. But the nature of our industrialization here is that because our industrial sector is not competitive globally, I mean, they're almost 90% dependent on domestic markets. So the kind of scale that we should have expected from industrialization, we are not getting it. Because there is very little you can take out there and be able to compete. The bit of exports, industrial export that we do, are mainly maybe around the West African sub-region. So there's a major policy and structural problem even around industrialization. For many of the industrial sector operators too, the level of local content is also very low. This is why we talk about resource-based industrialization. If your industrialization strategy is resource-based, the chances of being competitive are much higher than when we have situations where somebody claims to be an industrialist and all you do is just to couple some things together and put it out there as being made in Nigeria. That is not the kind of industrialization. Because that kind of industrialization will not give you the kind of jobs that you want. It will not give you the kind of linkages. It will not give you the kind of backward integration. It will not give you the kind of multiplier effect that an industry should give to an economy. But more importantly, is the issue of infrastructure. And I'm happy that lately, the central bank is also stepping up into the fray. I'm talking about infrastructure financing. Part of some of the things that the CBN government was talking about now is how the CBN can finance infrastructure. Stimulating some private sector partnership. And I think I read something about that, trying to put together between the private sector and the central bank a fund that will amount to almost 15 trillion to support infrastructure. I think that is key. Because there's no way you can develop the industries with the kind of logistics problem that we are facing today, with the kind of power situation that we are facing today. Right now, even oil prices has gone down. A lot of our members have been asking me, why is diesel price not going down? Because the price of diesel is still high. You are wondering. I had to find out from industry players what is happening. They said they cannot import because they don't have foreign exchange. So it is only the stock that has been there that people are still selling, and of course people naturally will take advantage. If you have had a refinery that was functioning, that kind of thing will not happen. How do we explain a country for 50 years in oil business, and we are still spending so much on the importation of petroleum products? It's the most scandalous, it's one of the most scandalous that has happened to this economy. By now, you should have a much more level of reserves, if not for the massive importation of petroleum products that we have gone through over the last 2 decades or more. It is unpardonable. We now left our refineries completely in the hands of the public sector, in the hands of bureaucrats and politicians. This is part of the price that we are paying today. So we need to have a holistic approach and understand the fundamentals of what can make industries thrive, from the point of policy and from the point of infrastructure. If you talk of agriculture, it is not enough to give money to those who are in agriculture. We need to develop the linkages between agriculture and industry. We need to provide logistics to move the products from the farm to the markets. We need to provide facilities for storage to minimize post-harvest losses. And more importantly, we need to create that processing so that we can easily process whatever it is, whatever is produced. That is the way you can generate off-takers for those who are in agri. Because if you talk to them, part of their biggest problem in agriculture is the problem of off-takers. How ridiculous farm gate prices are, especially for food products, especially in harvest seasons. Those prices are extremely ridiculous. They are low that they don't provide incentives for any serious person to go into farming. So we need to have a holistic look at all of this. Some of these things will not be short-term things. It's better late than never.
Thank you very much.
Not giving infrastructure the right kind of attention that you ought to give to. We have the people who can make things happen in this economy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muda Yusuf. You've really made a very incisive contribution today on the business environment and manufacturing, and we will continue this conversation in the weeks to come. Thank you very much for your insight and your interventions today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
And that was Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, giving us perspective on COVID-19 pandemic and the implications for the business environment and manufacturing. I see have here Mr. Bosun Omofaye, CEO of Frontier Africa Reports. From 10 a.m., we'll continue this conversation in the market review as we look at the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on agribusiness and industrialization. Stay tuned.